The rain had been falling over the small town of Ashwood for nearly 3 days. It wasn't a violent storm. There was no thunder, no lightning, no dramatic winds. Just a constant curtain of gray rain that seemed to wash the color out of everything. For 17-year-old Ethan Carter, the weather perfectly matched how he felt. 2 months earlier, his grandfather, William Carter, had passed away at the age of 98. William had lived a long life. A respected teacher. A loving husband. A father, grandfather, and storyteller. But to Ethan, he had simply been Grandpa. The man who always had a warm smile. The man who taught him how to fish. The man who told stories beside the fireplace during winter nights. And now he was gone. The old Carter family house stood at the edge of town, surrounded by ancient oak trees that had probably been there longer than anyone could remember. After William's death, Ethan's parents decided they would sell the property. The house was simply too old. Too expensive to maintain. Too full of memories. So during summer break, Ethan volunteered to help clean it out. At least, that was what he told everyone. The truth was different. He wasn't ready to say goodbye. Not yet. Every room in the house felt alive with memories. The kitchen where Grandpa made pancakes every Sunday. The living room where he sat in his favorite chair. The porch where he watched sunsets. Every corner whispered stories. Stories Ethan wasn't ready to leave behind. On the 3rd day of cleaning, his mother handed him a flashlight. "There's still the attic," she said. Ethan groaned. "The attic?" His mother laughed. "Yes. And don't complain. Grandpa kept 50 years of junk up there." "Great. Maybe you'll find treasure. Or spiders. Probably both." Ethan grabbed the flashlight and climbed the narrow staircase leading upward. The attic door creaked as he pushed it open. A cloud of dust exploded into the air. He coughed immediately. "Definitely spiders," he muttered. The attic was enormous. Old furniture sat beneath white sheets. Boxes were stacked against walls. Broken lamps. Suitcases. Photographs. Books. Everything covered in decades of dust. The air smelled ancient. As if time itself had been stored there. Ethan switched on his flashlight and slowly began exploring. Most of what he found was ordinary. Old clothes. Yellowed newspapers. Family photographs. Rusty tools. Hours passed. The rain continued tapping against the roof overhead. Eventually Ethan reached the farthest corner of the attic. Hidden behind a large wooden wardrobe was a small cedar chest. Unlike everything else in the attic, the chest looked carefully preserved. Almost protected. Someone had clearly wanted it to survive. Curious, Ethan pulled it forward. Dust swirled around him. The chest wasn't locked. He lifted the lid. Inside were only a few items. A pocket watch. A faded photograph. And a single sealed envelope. Nothing else. The envelope immediately caught his attention. Its paper had turned yellow with age. The edges were fragile. Across the front, written in elegant black ink, were 6 words. "To whoever finds this in 2026. Ethan froze. For a moment he simply stared. Then he laughed nervously. "Very funny, Grandpa. But something felt strange. Very strange." The envelope looked old. Really old. Not like a prop. Not like something recently created as a joke. His hands suddenly felt cold. Slowly he turned the envelope over. The seal had never been broken. On the back was a date. June 17, 1926. Ethan blinked. Then blinked again. That couldn't be right. Could it? Carefully, he opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten letter. The ink had faded slightly but remained readable. At the top was written, June 17, 1926. To the person who discovers this letter exactly 100 years from now. Ethan sat down on an old trunk. The attic suddenly felt very quiet. Only the sound of rain remained. He began reading. If you are reading this, then my calculations were correct. I do not know your name. I do not know who you are. But I know the year. 2026. And I know several things that will happen before you find this letter. Ethan felt a chill travel down his spine. His eyes moved to the next lines. The great ocean liner called Titanic will become famous long after its sinking. Humans will walk upon the moon. There will be a second world war, far deadlier than the first. Machines will fit inside pockets and connect people across the entire world. And in the year 2001, giant towers in New York City will fall during a terrible attack. Ethan stopped breathing. His heart pounded. The attic suddenly felt colder. How was this possible? The letter had been dated 1926. Long before the moon landing. Long before World War II. Long before smartphones. Long before September 11th. Yet every prediction was correct. Exactly correct. He read the passage again. And again. And again. There had to be an explanation. A trick. A forgery. Something. Anything. But the paper looked. If these events have occurred exactly as described, then I ask you to keep reading. What I am about to tell you sounds impossible. I would not believe it myself had I not witnessed it. My name is Thomas Carter. And 10 years ago, I briefly saw the future. Ethan nearly dropped the letter. Thomas Carter. He knew that name. Every Carter family member knew that name. Thomas Carter was his great-great-grandfather. The man who built the family house. The man whose portrait still hung downstairs. The man who died nearly 80 years ago. Ethan stared into the darkness of the attic. His pulse hammered inside his ears. Rain tapped against the roof. Somewhere in the house a floorboard creaked. Suddenly he no longer felt alone. Not because someone was there. But because it felt as if history itself had awakened around him. He looked back at the letter. The next paragraph began. It happened on October 14, 1916. The day that changed everything. Ethan swallowed hard. Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside the attic, surrounded by forgotten memories and a century of silence, he prepared to learn a secret that had remained hidden for 100 years. And deep down, he already sensed that whatever happened on October 14, 1916, was about to change his life too. For several seconds, Ethan simply stared at the letter. The words seemed impossible. A man from 1926 claiming he had seen the future. A man who somehow knew about World War II, the moon landing, smartphones, and events that would happen decades after his death. Every logical part of Ethan's mind told him the story had to be fake. Yet the evidence sat in his hands. The paper was old. The ink was old. Everything about the letter looked authentic. And the predictions were correct. Outside, rain continued striking the attic roof. A distant rumble echoed across the sky. Ethan took a deep breath and continued reading. October 14, 1916. I remember every detail of that day. I remember the cold air. I remember the smell of wet leaves. I remember believing it was an ordinary morning. I was wrong. Thomas explained that he was 26 years old at the time. America had not yet entered the First World War. Ashwood was still a quiet farming town surrounded by forests and rivers. Life moved slowly. Most people spent their days working, farming, and raising families. The future seemed simple. Predictable. At least until that morning. I was delivering supplies to a neighboring town. The journey required crossing Black Hollow Forest. Locals often avoided the forest after dark. Stories existed about strange lights among the trees. Most considered them foolish legends. So did I. Thomas wrote that the day began normally. His horse-drawn wagon followed the narrow dirt road through the woods. The autumn air was cool. Golden leaves drifted from the trees. Everything seemed peaceful. Then something changed. Around noon, the forest became unnaturally quiet. Birds stopped singing. Wind stopped blowing. Even the insects became silent. Thomas described feeling an overwhelming sense of unease. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling that something was watching. Something ancient. Something impossible. He slowed his horse. The silence deepened. Then he noticed something strange ahead. A light. Bright. White. Floating between the trees. At first I believed sunlight was reflecting from glass. Then I realized the light was moving. Ethan leaned closer to the page. The story felt less like a letter now. More like a confession. A secret hidden for a century. Thomas continued. The light grew larger as he approached. Soon he realized it wasn't a lantern. It wasn't a fire. It wasn't anything he recognized. The light seemed to hang in the air itself. Like a tear in reality. A doorway made entirely of glowing energy. My horse refused to move closer. No matter how hard I pulled the reins, it would not advance. The animal was terrified. Thomas climbed down from the wagon. His instincts screamed at him to leave. To run. But curiosity proved stronger. Slowly, he walked toward the light. Each step felt heavier than the last. The air vibrated around him. The temperature changed. The forest appeared distorted. As if the world itself were bending. Then he reached the glowing object. And everything changed. The moment I touched the light, I disappeared. Ethan stopped. His pulse quickened. He looked toward the attic door. Part of him wanted to stop reading. The story was becoming unsettling. Yet he couldn't look away. He continued. One moment I stood inside Black Hollow Forest. The next moment I stood somewhere impossible. Thomas described finding himself inside a massive building. At first he thought he had died. Nothing around him made sense. Bright electric lights illuminated everything. Glass walls stretched high above. Strange machines moved across polished floors. Hundreds of people rushed past. Men and women dressed in styles he had never seen. Some carried glowing devices. Others spoke into small objects held near their faces. The entire place felt alive with technology beyond his understanding. I believed I had entered another world. Then Thomas saw a sign. A large electronic display mounted above a crowd. The sign read, Ashwood Central Station. And beneath it, October 14, 2026. Thomas stared at the date. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. 110 years into the future. Impossible. Yet somehow true. I stood frozen among strangers. No one seemed surprised by my appearance. It was as though they could not truly see me. People walked past him. Through him almost. Some glanced in his direction but quickly looked away. Thomas felt like a ghost. Present but unnoticed. Real yet invisible. Then he noticed something even stranger. A television screen mounted on a nearby wall. Moving images filled the display. The pictures looked more realistic than any film he had ever imagined possible. A news broadcast was playing. A reporter spoke about world events. Thomas listened carefully. Every word changed his understanding of reality. He learned about airplanes crossing oceans. Computers. Satellites. Space travel. Nations that did not yet exist in 1916. Technologies beyond imagination. For hours he wandered the station. Watching. Learning. Listening. Trying desperately to understand. Then something happened. Something even more shocking. I saw a boy sitting alone on a bench. The boy looked about 17. Dark hair. Blue jacket. Thoughtful expression. He sat reading a book while waiting for a train. At first the sight seemed ordinary. Then Thomas noticed the boy's face. His eyes. His features. The shape of his smile. They looked familiar. Terrifyingly familiar. The boy looked exactly like my future bloodline. Thomas couldn't explain why. But somehow he knew. The teenager was connected to him. A descendant. Someone from his family. Someone who would exist more than a century later. He wanted to speak. To warn him. To ask questions. But he couldn't. An invisible barrier separated them. The boy remained unaware. After several minutes, the teenager stood and walked away. Thomas never learned his name. But he never forgot the face. I often wondered who that boy became. Ethan's hands tightened around the letter. A strange feeling settled in his stomach. The description felt uncomfortably familiar. Too familiar. But he pushed the thought aside and kept reading. Hours passed for Thomas inside the future station. Then the glowing light appeared again. The same impossible energy he had touched in the forest. Only now it hovered beside a train platform. The moment I touched the light a second time, I returned home. Suddenly he was back in Black Hollow Forest. His horse stood exactly where he had left it. The wagon remained untouched. The forest appeared normal. Birds sang again. Wind moved through the trees. Everything seemed ordinary. Except one detail. His pocket watch. The watch showed that only 3 minutes had passed. 3 minutes. Yet Thomas had spent nearly an entire day in the future. No one believed my story. Not my friends. Not my family. Not even my wife. For years Thomas remained silent. Eventually he convinced himself the experience had been a dream. A hallucination. A moment of madness. Then future events began coming true. One by one. Exactly as he had witnessed. The impossible slowly became undeniable. That realization terrified him. Because there was one prediction he had never told anyone. One event he had kept secret. Even from his family. Even from himself. Ethan's heart raced as he reached the next paragraph. The handwriting seemed shakier. Less confident. As if Thomas had struggled to write the words. There is one final thing I witnessed in the future. Something far more personal. Something connected directly to my family. Ethan swallowed. A cold sensation crept down his spine. The attic suddenly felt smaller. Darker. More confined. Outside, rain pounded harder against the roof. The next sentence made his blood run cold. On a wall inside Ashwood Central Station, I saw a memorial plaque. And engraved upon that plaque was a name. The writing paused. A large gap separated the next line. As if Thomas had hesitated before continuing. Finally, beneath the blank space, the words appeared. The name was Ethan Carter. Ethan froze. The letter nearly slipped from his hands. His own name. His exact name. Written by a man who had died decades before he was born. A man writing in 1926. A man who should never have known he existed. For a long moment, Ethan simply stared. Unable to breathe. Unable to think. Unable to move. Then he slowly looked at the final sentence on the page. And what he read made his heart stop. If you are Ethan Carter, then the future I saw is closer than you think. Ethan's hands shook so badly that he nearly dropped the letter. The attic seemed to spin around him. Dust floated through the beam of his flashlight like tiny ghosts suspended in the darkness. His name. His exact name. Written on a piece of paper dated 1926. It wasn't possible. There had to be another explanation. Another Ethan Carter. Another person. A coincidence. A trick. Anything. Yet deep inside, he knew what frightened him most. Not the fact that Thomas had known his name. But the fact that every prediction in the letter had already come true. The moon landing. World War II. September 11th. Modern technology. Everything. If Thomas had been correct about all of those events. What if he was correct about Ethan too? The thought sent a chill down his spine. Outside, the rain continued falling. The old house groaned softly as wind brushed against its walls. For a moment Ethan considered putting the letter back into the cedar chest. Closing the lid. Pretending he had never found it. But curiosity won. It always did. He turned the page over. At first it appeared blank. Then something slid free and landed on the attic floor. A folded piece of paper. Old. Fragile. Yellowed by time. Carefully, Ethan picked it up. His pulse quickened. It was a map. Hand-drawn in faded ink. Most of the landmarks were familiar. The river. The hills surrounding Ashwood. The old railroad line. And near the center of the map, circled in black ink, were two words. Black Hollow. Beneath it, Thomas had written a note. If the letter reaches Ethan Carter, he must go here. The answers remain where the journey began. Ethan stared at the words. His grandfather had never mentioned any map. Never mentioned Black Hollow. Never mentioned a letter. Why? If the secret had been passed down through generations, why had no one spoken about it? Unless... maybe nobody had ever found the chest before. Maybe the secret had remained hidden for 100 years. Waiting specifically for 2026. Waiting specifically for him. The thought made him uneasy. Very uneasy. He folded the map carefully and placed it inside his jacket. Then he climbed down from the attic. His mother was sorting old books in the living room. "You were up there forever," she said. Ethan forced a smile. "Found some interesting stuff. Anything valuable?" He hesitated. The letter suddenly felt too important to discuss. Too strange. Too impossible. "No," he replied. "Mostly old papers." His mother nodded and returned to work. But Ethan noticed something. The portrait hanging above the fireplace. The portrait of Thomas Carter. For the first time, Ethan truly looked at it. Thomas stood proudly beside a wooden fence. His expression was serious. Thoughtful. Almost as if he carried a secret no one else knew. And suddenly Ethan understood. The man in the painting wasn't just an ancestor anymore. He was the author of the letter. The witness to something impossible. And somehow, their lives were connected across a century. That night, Ethan barely slept. Rain tapped against his bedroom window. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the words again. The name was Ethan Carter. Over and over. Again and again. Eventually, around 2 in the morning, he gave up trying to sleep. He sat at his desk. The letter lay before him. The map beside it. Moonlight spilled through the window. For hours he studied every detail. Every word. Every line. Searching for clues. Then he noticed something unusual. Near the bottom corner of the map. A tiny symbol. So small he had missed it earlier. A circle. Inside the circle was a drawing of a clock. And beneath it, 4 numbers. 10:14. October 14th. The same date Thomas had entered the future. October 14th, 1916. A coincidence? Maybe. But Ethan no longer believed in coincidences. The next morning, the rain finally stopped. Gray clouds drifted away. Sunlight returned. And with it came a decision. He was going to Black Hollow Forest. Alone. The forest sat several miles outside town. Locals still avoided it after dark. Most considered it harmless superstition. Old stories passed down through generations. Stories about strange lights. Missing time. Unexplained sounds. Exactly the kind of legends teenagers usually ignored. Yet now Ethan couldn't stop thinking about them. By noon he had reached the forest trail. The air smelled fresh after the storm. Birds sang from the trees. Everything appeared perfectly normal. which somehow made it more unsettling. He followed the map deeper into the woods. Minutes became hours. The path narrowed. Trees grew thicker. Shadows stretched across the ground. Soon he reached a section of forest unlike any he had seen before. The air felt different. Still. Heavy. Almost electric. And then something strange happened. The birds stopped singing. Instantly. As if someone had flipped a switch. Silence filled the forest. Absolute silence. Ethan stopped walking. His heart began pounding. He remembered Thomas's description. The forest became unnaturally quiet. Birds stopped singing. Wind stopped blowing. The exact same thing was happening. A cold breeze touched the back of his neck. Slowly, Ethan looked around. Nothing. No movement. No animals. No sound. Just silence. Then he saw it. Ahead. Between the trees. A structure. Small. Hidden beneath vines and moss. An abandoned building. Ethan frowned. The structure wasn't on any map he had ever seen. It looked ancient. Perhaps older than the town itself. Its stone walls were cracked. Its roof had partially collapsed. Nature had almost reclaimed it. Almost. Because one feature remained surprisingly intact. A clock. Mounted above the entrance. Frozen forever at the same time. 10:14. Ethan's stomach tightened. The same numbers from the map. The same numbers hidden beside Thomas's note. Slowly, he approached. Each step felt heavier. The building radiated an unsettling presence. As though it existed slightly outside reality. A forgotten place. A place time itself had abandoned. The doorway stood open. Darkness waited inside. Ethan hesitated. Every instinct told him to leave. To turn around. To go home. Instead, he stepped through the doorway. The temperature dropped immediately. The interior was larger than expected. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor. Dust covered everything. Yet strangely, the center of the room remained untouched. Clean. Pristine. As if someone had recently been there. Or something. Then Ethan noticed a wooden box sitting alone on a table. The box looked remarkably similar to the cedar chest from the attic. His pulse quickened. Carefully, he opened it. Inside was another envelope. Another letter. And on the front, written in familiar handwriting, were 6 words. For Ethan Carter, open here. His mouth went dry. Thomas had written this too. 100 years ago. Waiting. Planning. Expecting him to arrive. With trembling fingers, Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The message was short. Very short. But every word sent ice through his veins. If you have found this letter, then events are unfolding exactly as I feared. You are standing at the place where time first broke. And if the signs are returning, then the doorway may open again. Ethan swallowed hard. His eyes raced to the next line. When it does, you must not enter. Silence filled the room. A single drop of water fell somewhere in the darkness. Drip. Then another. Drip. Ethan continued reading. I made that mistake once. If you cross the threshold again, the future may see you. And once the future sees you, it never forgets. The room suddenly felt colder. Much colder. Then a new sound echoed through the building. A faint humming noise. Low. Mechanical. Impossible. Ethan froze. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't coming from inside the building. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The humming grew louder. The air vibrated. Dust rose from the floor. The old walls trembled. And then, a bright white glow appeared in the center of the room. Exactly where Thomas had described it. A crack of light. Suspended in midair. Growing larger. Brighter. More powerful. The doorway. It was opening. Again. 110 years later. And as Ethan stared into the impossible light, he saw something moving inside it. A figure. Human. Standing on the other side. Watching him. Waiting. And as the figure stepped closer, Ethan realized with horror. It had his face. Ethan couldn't breathe. The glowing doorway pulsed in the center of the ruined building. White light spilled across the stone floor. The humming sound grew louder. Stronger. Almost alive. And inside the doorway stood a figure. A human figure. Watching him. Waiting. The figure took another step forward. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. Because the face staring back at him was his own. Not similar. Not close. Exactly the same. The same eyes. The same hair. The same expression. It was like looking into a mirror. Except the other Ethan looked older. Several years older. His face appeared more serious. More tired. As though he had seen things nobody should ever witness. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. Then the older Ethan raised a hand. Slowly. Carefully. As if afraid to frighten him. Ethan, the figure said. The voice echoed strangely through the building. It sounded familiar. Because it was his own voice. Only older. I don't have much time. Every muscle in Ethan's body screamed for him to run. Yet his feet remained frozen. What are you? He whispered. The figure's expression darkened. I'm you. The answer sent ice through Ethan's veins. No. It's true. No. The older Ethan looked down briefly. Almost sadly. I reacted the same way. The humming intensified. Light flickered around the doorway. The entire room seemed unstable. As though reality itself was struggling to hold together. Ethan, the older version said urgently. Listen carefully. Despite his fear, Ethan listened. Because somehow, deep down, he knew the figure was telling the truth. I crossed the doorway. The older Ethan glanced behind him. Whatever existed on the other side clearly terrified him. When Thomas entered the future, he created a connection. A connection between times. The room trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. The older Ethan continued. For decades the connection remained weak. Then why is it opening now? The figure stared directly into his eyes. Because this is the year Thomas saw. The realization struck Ethan immediately. The exact year written on the envelope. The exact year Thomas had predicted. The exact year the letter was meant to be discovered. Everything had been leading to this moment. For 100 years. What happens if the doorway opens completely? Ethan asked. The older Ethan hesitated. Then answered quietly. Something crosses over. A cold silence followed. The younger Ethan swallowed hard. What crosses over? The older version didn't answer immediately. And that silence was answer enough. Whatever it was. It wasn't good. The humming grew louder again. Suddenly the white light flickered. Images flashed inside the doorway. Quick glimpses. Like fragments of broken memories. Ethan saw massive cities. Towering skyscrapers. Flying vehicles. Technology beyond imagination. Then the images changed. Buildings collapsed. Fires burned. People ran. Dark clouds covered the sky. Entire streets stood abandoned. The scenes lasted only seconds. Yet each one felt terrifyingly real. The older Ethan watched the visions with visible dread. That's one possible future. What happened? We don't know. You don't know. The older Ethan shook his head. Not completely. His expression hardened. But I know it starts here. He pointed toward the glowing doorway. At Black Hollow. The ruined building suddenly shook violently. A loud crack echoed through the walls. The doorway expanded. The light became brighter. Almost blinding. And for the first time, Ethan noticed shadows moving inside it. Not human shadows. Something else. Something larger. Something wrong. The older Ethan saw them too. Fear flashed across his face. They're coming sooner than I thought. Who? Again, the older version hesitated. Then spoke a single word. Observers. The name meant nothing to Ethan. Yet hearing it made his stomach twist. What are they? We don't know. Aliens? No. Ghosts? No. The older Ethan struggled to find the right words. It's more complicated than that. The shadows shifted inside the light. Watching. Waiting. They exist outside normal time. The explanation sounded impossible. Yet after everything Ethan had seen, impossible no longer seemed impossible. They noticed Thomas when he entered the future. The older Ethan continued. And now they've noticed us. A chill ran through the room. Us. Not just Ethan. The entire Carter family. Across generations. Connected to something ancient. Something beyond understanding. The doorway pulsed again. Suddenly another image appeared. A train station. Modern. Bright. Crowded. Ashwood Central Station. The same station Thomas had visited. Ethan immediately recognized it. And there, mounted on a wall, stood a memorial plaque. The plaque. The one from Thomas's letter. The one that carried Ethan's name. His heart pounded. He stepped closer, trying desperately to read the inscription. The image sharpened. For one brief second, he could see the words. Then the vision flickered. Almost vanished. But not before he read a single line. In memory of Ethan Carter. The rest disappeared. Ethan froze. His blood turned cold. The memorial was real. Not a mistake. Not another Ethan Carter. Him. His future. His death. The older Ethan looked away. As if unable to watch. That's why Thomas left the letters. The younger Ethan's voice shook. I die. The older version remained silent. The silence answered everything. For several moments neither of them spoke. Then Ethan asked the question that terrified him most. Can it be changed? The older Ethan looked directly at him. For the first time, a small spark of hope appeared in his eyes. Maybe. Maybe. Not yes. Not no. Maybe. It was enough. The doorway suddenly surged with energy. The humming transformed into a deafening roar. Cracks of white light raced across the walls. The shadows inside moved closer. Much closer. Ethan could finally see their outlines. Tall. Thin. Human-shaped. Yet somehow wrong. As though they only imitated human form. The sight made his skin crawl. The older Ethan stepped backward. Toward the light. His expression became urgent. I have to go. Wait. You need to find Thomas's journal. What journal? It's hidden beneath. The rest vanished. The doorway exploded with brightness. The older Ethan disappeared from sight. Ethan. The younger Ethan lunged forward. Too late. The figure was gone. Only the light remained. Violently pulsing. Violently expanding. And then. Everything stopped. The humming ceased. The brightness vanished. The doorway collapsed. Silence returned. The ruined building stood empty once more. Ethan found himself alone. Breathing heavily. Heart racing. Unsure whether any of it had been real. Then he looked down. Lying on the floor where the doorway had been was a single object. A pocket watch. Old. Silver. Covered in scratches. Ethan picked it up carefully. The watch felt warm. As if someone had been holding it moments earlier. Engraved on the back were 3 words. Property of Ethan. His hands trembled. Because he had never owned this watch. Not yet. And when he opened it, he found a folded piece of paper hidden inside. A message. Written in familiar handwriting. His own handwriting. The note contained only one sentence. A sentence that changed everything. The journal is under the grandfather clock. Ethan stared at the words. The grandfather clock. Back at the Carter house. The oldest piece of furniture in the entire family. A clock that had stood in the hallway for over a century. A clock that Thomas himself had owned. A clock nobody had ever moved. Suddenly, every piece of the puzzle began fitting together. Thomas knew. The older Ethan knew. And now Ethan knew where to look next. But as he slipped the watch into his pocket and turned toward the doorway of the ruined building, he failed to notice one final thing. Far behind him, in the darkest corner of the room, two pale eyes slowly opened. Watching. Silent. Patient. And very much awake. Ethan didn't stop running until he reached the edge of Black Hollow Forest. The afternoon sun was already sinking toward the horizon. Long shadows stretched across the ground. His lungs burned. His heart hammered. Yet none of it compared to the thoughts racing through his mind. The doorway. The older version of himself. The memorial plaque. The strange creatures called observers. And now, Thomas's journal. Every answer seemed connected to that journal. Whatever Thomas had learned after his encounter with the future, he had hidden it somewhere safe. Somewhere only Ethan was meant to find. As he hurried toward town, one thought refused to leave him. What if Thomas had known this would happen all along? The Carter house stood silent beneath the evening sky. Ethan arrived just before sunset. His parents had already gone home for the night. Tomorrow they planned to continue sorting old belongings. For now, the house was empty. And that was exactly what Ethan needed. He unlocked the front door. The familiar creak echoed through the hallway. Everything looked normal. Comfortingly normal. The faded wallpaper. The framed photographs. The scent of old wood. Yet now Ethan saw the house differently. No longer as a family home, but as a giant puzzle. A puzzle hidden across generations. Waiting for him. At the far end of the hallway stood the grandfather clock. Tall. Ancient. Silent. Its pendulum had stopped years ago. Thomas Carter had purchased it in 1902. According to family stories, it was one of his most treasured possessions. Ethan approached carefully. The clock towered above him. For decades it had simply been furniture. Now it felt like a vault. A hiding place. A secret keeper. He examined the wooden base. Nothing unusual. Then he noticed something strange. One section of wood looked slightly newer than the rest. Barely noticeable. Almost invisible. Unless someone knew where to look. Slowly, Ethan pressed against it. Click. A hidden panel sprang open. His pulse quickened immediately. Inside the compartment rested a thick leather-bound journal. And beneath it sat another envelope. Both covered in dust. Both untouched for decades. Ethan carefully lifted them out. The journal felt heavy. Important. Like something that carried the weight of history itself. Across the front cover, written in faded ink, were 4 simple words. Thomas Carter, Private Record. For a moment Ethan simply stared. Then he opened the first page. If you are reading this, Ethan, then the cycle has begun again. A chill ran down his spine. Not, if someone is reading this. Not, to my descendants. Specifically Ethan. Thomas had written directly to him. 100 years earlier. You may believe I possessed the gift of prophecy. I did not. I merely witnessed fragments of what was yet to come. And what I witnessed frightened me more than death itself. Ethan sat on the floor beneath the grandfather clock. Sunlight faded beyond the windows. Darkness slowly filled the room. Yet he couldn't stop reading. Thomas described spending years investigating his experience. Years searching for answers. Years trying to understand the glowing doorway. Eventually he discovered something disturbing. The doorway wasn't unique. Similar incidents had been reported throughout history. Ancient Rome. Medieval England. Colonial America. Different places. Different centuries. Yet always the same pattern. A sudden tear in time. A glimpse of another era. And afterward. Strange consequences. Many who crossed the doorway reported being watched. Ethan immediately remembered the pale eyes in the ruined building. The memory sent a shiver through him. Thomas continued. Most never saw the watchers clearly. Only shadows. Reflections. Figures standing just beyond sight. Yet every account described the same feeling. The feeling of being observed. Observed. The name suddenly made sense. Observers. They had been watching for centuries. Watching anyone who traveled through time. But why? And what did they want? Ethan turned the page. His hands trembling slightly. The next entry was dated. March 8, 1921. Have finally seen one clearly. The handwriting became shakier. Uneven. Almost frightened. It stood outside my bedroom window. Motionless. Watching. Its body resembled a human being. But its face was wrong. Not damaged. Not monstrous. Simply unfinished. Ethan swallowed. The description unsettled him deeply. Thomas continued. The creature remained there until sunrise. When daylight arrived, it vanished. Leaving no footprints. No evidence. Nothing except the certainty that it had been real. The room suddenly felt colder. Ethan glanced toward the nearby window. Outside, darkness had fully arrived. For a brief moment he imagined a pale figure standing in the yard. Watching. Waiting. He quickly looked back at the journal. Anything felt better than staring into the darkness. Several pages later, Ethan discovered sketches. Drawings Thomas had made. Rough pencil sketches. The first showed the glowing doorway. The second showed black hollow forest. The third made Ethan freeze. It depicted one of the observers. Tall. Thin. Featureless. Its face almost blank. Only two dark eyes. Nothing else. The image seemed impossible. Yet somehow familiar. As though Ethan had already seen it. Maybe in the doorway. Maybe in a dream. Maybe somewhere else. He wasn't sure. Then he reached the final section of the journal. The pages became increasingly frantic. More urgent. More desperate. As though Thomas had been racing against time. One particular entry stood out. Dated. June 16, 1926. The day before the letter had been written. The future is changing. Ethan frowned. Changing. How? He continued reading. Each time the doorway opens, new possibilities emerge. The future I witnessed in 1916 is no longer fixed. Events shift. Outcomes alter. Lives change. Hope flickered inside him. If the future could change, then perhaps the memorial plaque wasn't inevitable. Perhaps he wasn't destined to die. Perhaps Thomas had left these clues specifically to prevent that future. Then Ethan reached the next sentence. And his hope immediately faded. Unfortunately, the observers appear capable of changing events as well. Silence filled the room. The words seemed almost impossible to process. The observers weren't simply watching. They were influencing, interfering, manipulating. Thomas continued. I fear they seek a future in which the doorway remains permanently open. Ethan stared at the page. Permanently open. What would happen then? The answer appeared immediately below. If that occurs, the barrier between times may collapse entirely. His blood ran cold. Past and future would merge. History itself would become unstable. The consequences are beyond imagining. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes a person aware of every tiny sound. Every creak. Every breath. Every heartbeat. Then Ethan heard something. A noise upstairs. Footsteps. Slow footsteps. He froze. The house was supposed to be empty. Very slowly, he looked toward the staircase. The footsteps continued. 1, 2, 3. Heavy. Deliberate. Moving across the second floor. His pulse quickened. Maybe his parents had returned. Maybe. But something felt wrong. The footsteps stopped. Silence followed. Then came another sound. A soft scraping noise. As though something was dragging its fingers along the wall. Ethan stood. Every instinct screamed danger. The journal slipped into his backpack. He grabbed Thomas's envelope. Then the grandfather clock suddenly began ticking. Tick. 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 Ethan stared. The clock hadn't worked in years. Yet now the pendulum swung back and forth. Tick. 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 The sound echoed through the hallway. Louder. 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 And then all at once. Every clock in the house started ticking. The kitchen clock. The bedroom clocks. The old mantel clock. Dozens of clocks. All beginning simultaneously. Tick. 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 The noise became overwhelming. Almost deafening. And from upstairs came a voice. A whisper. Soft. Cold. Impossible. Speaking a single sentence. He's found the journal. Ethan's blood turned to ice. Because the voice wasn't human. And worse. It sounded happy. The whisper echoed through the house. He's found the journal. For a moment, Ethan couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The voice had come from upstairs. Soft. Cold. almost emotionless. Yet there had been something deeply disturbing about it. Not anger. Not hatred. Excitement. As though whoever had spoken had been waiting for this moment. Waiting for him. The grandfather clock continued ticking. Tick. 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 Every clock in the house answered in perfect rhythm. The entire building sounded alive. Like a giant heartbeat. Watching. Listening. Waiting. Ethan slowly backed away from the staircase. His backpack hung over one shoulder. Thomas's journal remained safely inside. Every instinct told him to leave immediately. Now. Before it was too late. Then he heard another sound. Footsteps. Coming from upstairs again. Slow. Measured. Deliberate. One step. Then another. Then another. Whoever, or whatever, was up there had begun moving. Toward the staircase. Toward him. Ethan didn't wait. He turned and ran. The front door flew open. Cool night air struck his face. He sprinted across the yard without looking back. Behind him, the old Carter house remained dark. Silent. Except for the ticking. Even from outside, he could still hear it. Hundreds of clocks ticking together. Like some impossible machine hidden within the walls. Ethan didn't stop until he reached town. Only then did he slow down. Only then did he realize his hands were shaking. Streetlights glowed above empty sidewalks. A few cars passed in the distance. Everything appeared normal. Ordinary. Safe. Yet Ethan no longer trusted normal. Not after the doorway. Not after the letters. Not after hearing that voice. He found a bench near the town square and sat down. For several minutes he simply stared at the journal. Thinking. Trying to make sense of everything. Then he noticed something he had missed before. Tucked inside the back cover was another folded page. A hidden page. Carefully, he removed it. The paper was newer than the others. Not modern. But newer. Perhaps written shortly before Thomas's death. At the top were 4 words. For the final opening. Ethan unfolded the page. His pulse quickened. If you are reading this, then the observers have begun moving openly. That means the final opening is approaching. The final opening. The phrase immediately caught his attention. Thomas had mentioned the doorway opening multiple times throughout history. But this sounded different. More important. More dangerous. He continued reading. The doorway follows a cycle. Each opening grows stronger than the last. The final opening occurs exactly 110 years after the first crossing. Ethan's eyes widened. 110 years. Thomas had crossed the doorway in 1916. It was now 2026. Exactly 110 years later. The final opening wasn't coming. It was already happening. When the final opening begins, 3 signs appear. Thomas had listed them. The first sign. The clocks awaken. Ethan immediately remembered the grandfather clock. The ticking. The entire house coming alive. The first sign had already happened. His stomach tightened. He continued. The second sign is the arrival of the Watchers. Watchers. Observers. Different names for the same thing. And Ethan had already seen them. The pale eyes in the ruined building. The voice upstairs. The second sign had happened too. Only one remained. His hands trembled slightly as he read on. The third sign is the appearance of the anchor. Anchor. The term meant nothing to him. Thomas offered no immediate explanation. Only a warning. When the anchor appears, the future and the past become connected through a single person. A single person. Ethan's heart sank. Because deep down he already knew who that person was. The letters. The visions. The memorial plaque. The older version of himself. Everything pointed toward the same answer. Him. He was the connection. The anchor. A cold breeze moved through the square. Ethan looked around uneasily. The streets were empty. Yet he suddenly felt watched. Again. The feeling had become disturbingly familiar. Slowly, he looked toward the far side of the street. A figure stood beneath a streetlight. Tall. Motionless. Watching him. Ethan froze. The figure's face remained hidden in shadow. But its posture felt wrong. Unnatural. As though it was pretending to be human. The figure didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't look away. It simply stood there. Watching. Then another figure appeared farther down the road. Then another. And another. 4 in total. Spread across the empty street. All motionless. All staring directly at him. Fear surged through Ethan. The observers had found him. Without thinking, he grabbed the journal and ran. The figures didn't chase him. At least not immediately. Yet somehow that made everything worse. Because it meant they didn't need to chase him. They knew where he was going. They knew he couldn't escape. The town library closed at midnight. Fortunately, the side entrance remained unlocked while staff cleaned inside. Ethan slipped through the door. The building was nearly empty. Rows of books stretched into the darkness. The familiar smell of paper and dust filled the air. For the first time all night, he felt slightly safer. Only slightly. He found a quiet corner and reopened the journal. There had to be more information. Something useful. Some way to stop whatever was happening. Page after page passed. Then he found an entry dated June 17, 1926. The same day Thomas wrote the first letter. The final entry in the entire journal. I finally understand why the future showed me Ethan Carter. Ethan leaned closer. Every word suddenly felt important. Critical. It was never about prediction. It was preparation. His pulse quickened. The future selected Ethan because he possesses something the observers cannot control. The sentence made no sense. What could he possibly have that they couldn't control? Thomas answered immediately. Choice. Ethan frowned. Choice. The observers can influence events. They can manipulate probabilities. They can guide outcomes. But they cannot force a decision made freely. The words lingered in Ethan's mind. Choice. Free will. Thomas believed the future wasn't fixed. It depended on decisions. On choices. And somehow Ethan's choice would determine what happened next. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from somewhere inside the library. Books fell. Shelves rattled. The sound came from the lower floor. Ethan looked up sharply. Silence followed. Then another crash. Closer. Much closer. Someone was inside the building. Searching. A librarian appeared at the end of the aisle. An elderly woman Ethan recognized immediately. Mrs. Harper. She had worked there for years. Relief flooded through him. Until she spoke. Ethan. Her voice sounded wrong. Flat. Emotionless. Not like herself at all. She smiled. But only with her mouth. Not her eyes. Never her eyes. And then Ethan realized something horrifying. Mrs. Harper's shadow wasn't moving correctly. The library lights flickered overhead. Her shadow remained perfectly still. As though it belonged to someone else. Or something else. Ethan, she repeated. Slowly. Calmly. Almost kindly. We've been looking for you. His blood turned cold. The journal slipped from his hands. Mrs. Harper took a step forward. Then another. And another. The lights flickered again. For a fraction of a second, her appearance changed. The disguise vanished. Only for an instant. But it was enough. Enough for Ethan to glimpse the thing hiding underneath. The pale skin. The unfinish. Ethan stumbled backward. The journal slipped from his hands and hit the library floor with a loud thud. For a split second, neither he nor the observer moved. The creature wore Mrs. Harper's face perfectly. Almost perfectly. But now Ethan had seen through the disguise. The eyes. The unnatural smile. The unfinished features hidden beneath the illusion. It wasn't human. It had never been human. And worst of all, it knew that Ethan knew. The observer tilted its head slightly. Like a scientist examining an experiment. Then it spoke. Thomas Carter was exceptionally difficult. Its voice sounded calm. Polite. Almost friendly. Yet hearing it made Ethan's skin crawl. You spoke with Thomas. The creature smiled wider. We observed Thomas. Observed. The word suddenly felt far more sinister. For over a century, these things had been watching his family. Generation after generation. Waiting. Planning. For what? The observer stepped forward. You should not fear us, Ethan. I'm not taking advice from a monster. The creature paused. As though genuinely considering the statement. Then it nodded. A reasonable response. The lights flickered overhead. For a moment, the library seemed darker. Older. Almost forgotten. And then Ethan noticed something terrifying. The books. Thousands of books lined the shelves. Yet every single title had disappeared. The covers were blank. The spines were blank. As though reality itself was being erased around him. The observer noticed his reaction. Time is becoming unstable. Its voice remained calm. Matter of fact. The final opening approaches. Ethan's heart raced. "What do you want from me?" The creature's expression became strangely serious. "We want you to choose correctly." The answer stunned him. Not control him. Not kill him. Not capture him. Choose. The exact word Thomas had written. Choice. Everything seemed to revolve around that single concept. The observer continued. "You are the anchor." The phrase hit him like a physical blow. Thomas had used the same term. The future and the past connected through a single person. Him. What does that actually mean? For the first time, the creature seemed reluctant. As though revealing the answer violated some rule. Finally it spoke. "It means reality is listening to you." Silence followed. Ethan stared. Waiting for more. The observer sighed. Or at least performed something resembling a sigh. The doorway requires a point of connection. A bridge. A reference point. A human life tied to both timelines. Its eyes locked onto his. "You." The word echoed through the library. And suddenly pieces of the puzzle began fitting together. Thomas had seen Ethan. The older Ethan had crossed the doorway. The memorial plaque carried Ethan's name. Everything connected through him. Not because he was special. But because somehow he had become the center of the connection. The anchor. A distant rumble shook the building. Not thunder. Something else. The shelves trembled. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The observer glanced upward. Concern flashed across its face. A real emotion. For the first time. And that frightened Ethan more than anything. Because it meant even the observers were worried. What was that? The creature looked back at him. The future. Ethan frowned. The future? It is leaking. The answer sent a chill through him. Leaking. As though time itself had cracked. Suddenly every light in the library went out. Darkness swallowed everything. Gasps echoed from somewhere in the building. Then emergency lights flickered on. Red. Dim. Unsettling. The entire library now looked like something from a nightmare. The observer's face appeared even more disturbing beneath the crimson glow. And then the creature looked behind Ethan. Its expression changed immediately. Fear. Real fear. The observer took a step backward. Then another. "What is it?" Ethan asked. The creature didn't answer. Its eyes remained fixed on something behind him. Something Ethan couldn't see. Slowly, he turned. At first he saw nothing. Then he noticed movement near the end of the aisle. A figure. Standing perfectly still. Watching. Not an observer. Something else. Something far worse. The figure appeared human-shaped. Yet its body seemed made from shifting darkness. Its outline flickered constantly. Changing. Distorting. As though reality struggled to define it. The air around it bent unnaturally. Like heat rising from a fire. The observer whispered a single word. Impossible. The dark figure took one step forward. Every bookshelf in the room shook violently. Books crashed to the floor. Glass shattered. The emergency lights flickered wildly. And suddenly Ethan understood. Whatever this thing was. Even the observers feared it. The shadow figure raised its head. Where a face should have been existed only darkness. An endless void. Then it spoke. Its voice sounded like dozens of voices layered together. Young voices. Old voices. Male. Female. Human. Inhuman. All speaking simultaneously. Ethan Carter. The sound rattled the shelves. The observer moved protectively in front of Ethan. A gesture that made absolutely no sense. Why would it protect him? The creature answered before he could ask. If it reaches the anchor, everything ends. The shadow entity moved closer. Reality distorted around it. The library seemed to stretch and twist. Rows of books elongated into impossible shapes. Walls bent outward. Time itself felt unstable. And suddenly Ethan remembered something from Thomas's journal. A line he had barely understood at the time. The observers are not the oldest things watching the doorway. The memory hit him like lightning. Not the oldest things. Meaning something existed before them. Something older. Something far more powerful. And now it was here. The observer looked directly at Ethan. For the first time, its calm mask completely disappeared. Ethan. Its voice trembled. If you wish to survive, listen carefully. The shadow entity continued approaching. Slowly. Relentlessly. The observer spoke rapidly. There are two futures. The future we seek. And the future it seeks. It? Ethan asked. The observer nodded toward the darkness. The Devourer. The name seemed to suck warmth from the room. The Devourer. Ancient. Hungry. Waiting beyond time itself. The observer continued. If the doorway remains open, it enters reality completely. Ethan swallowed hard. And then? The observer's expression became grim. There will be no past. No future. No history. Only it. The words echoed through the crimson-lit library. The Devourer took another step. Closer now. Much closer. Suddenly the journal lying on the floor burst open. Its pages flipped wildly. A powerful wind filled the room. Yet no windows were open. The pages stopped on a section Ethan had never seen before. A hidden section. Words began appearing across the paper. Fresh ink writing itself. As though someone invisible held a pen. Ethan stared in disbelief. The handwriting was unmistakable. His own. Not Thomas's. Not the older Ethan's. His. And the message contained only one sentence. Go to the train station before midnight. The observer saw the words. The Devourer saw them too. And for the first time since appearing, the shadow creature reacted. It stopped moving. As though the message had changed everything. The observer looked at Ethan. Urgently. Go. What happens at the station? The creature shook its head. No time. Tell me. The observer's eyes widened. Then it spoke the words Ethan would never forget. The person waiting there is the reason Thomas saw the future. Silence. Absolute silence. The reason Thomas saw the future. The beginning of everything. The answer to a mystery more than a century old. And whoever it was. They were waiting at Ashwood Central Station. Right now. Just before midnight. For several seconds, Ethan stood frozen. The words echoed through his mind. The person waiting there is the reason Thomas saw the future. Everything. The letters. The doorway. The observers. The devourer. A century of secrets. All connected to a single person waiting at Ashwood Central Station. Before midnight. The shadow creature known as the Devourer remained motionless at the end of the aisle. The observer stood between Ethan and the darkness. Protecting him. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. A few hours earlier he had believed the observers were the enemy. Now one of them was risking everything to keep him alive. The world had become far stranger than he ever imagined. Go, the observer repeated. The emergency lights flickered violently. The devourer's shape expanded slightly. As though reality itself was weakening around it. You don't have much time. Ethan nodded. Then he ran. The library doors burst open. Cold night air greeted him. The streets of Ashwood looked deserted. Unnaturally deserted. No cars. No pedestrians. No sounds. It felt as though the town itself was holding its breath. Waiting. Watching. The train station stood on the opposite side of town. Normally a 20-minute walk. Tonight, Ethan ran the entire distance. The journal remained clutched beneath his arm. His lungs burned. His legs ached. Yet he never slowed. Because somewhere ahead lay the answer. The answer Thomas had spent his life searching for. The station came into view shortly before midnight. And the moment Ethan saw it, he stopped. The building looked exactly like the station from Thomas's description. Exactly like the station from the visions. Bright white lights illuminated the platforms. Modern glass walls reflected the night sky. Everything appeared ordinary. Except for one impossible detail. Ashwood didn't have a train station. Not anymore. The original station had been demolished 40 years earlier. Only an empty lot should have existed there. Yet now the station stood before him. Real. Solid. Impossible. As though it had appeared from nowhere. Or perhaps from another time. A large digital clock above the entrance displayed the time. 11:52 p.m. 8 minutes until midnight. 8 minutes until whatever came next. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped inside. The station was almost empty. Rows of benches lined the waiting area. Electronic displays glowed overhead. Announcements echoed faintly through hidden speakers. Yet only a handful of people occupied the building. Most sat silently. Motionless. Not speaking. Not moving. Just waiting. Something felt wrong immediately. Very wrong. As Ethan walked past one of the passengers, he noticed their reflection in a nearby window. The reflection wasn't matching their movements. A split-second delay. Tiny. Almost invisible. Yet unmistakable. The same thing happened with another passenger. And another. And another. Ethan's stomach tightened. These weren't ordinary people. Not entirely. Then he saw him. Sitting alone on a bench near platform 3. A teenage boy. Dark hair. Blue jacket. A book resting in his hands. The exact boy Thomas had described in his letter. The exact boy he had seen in 2026. The exact face Thomas believed belonged to his bloodline. The boy slowly looked up. Their eyes met. And Ethan's heart nearly stopped. Because he recognized the face instantly. The boy wasn't a descendant. The boy wasn't another family member. The boy was Thomas Carter. Young Thomas. 26-year-old Thomas. The version from 1916. The very day he first entered the future. Ethan stared in disbelief. The impossible truth settled over him. Thomas hadn't merely seen the future. He had physically arrived here. At this station. At this exact moment. And somehow, through the doorway, both timelines had connected. 110 years apart. Young Thomas stood. Confusion filled his eyes. He clearly didn't understand where he was. Or how he had arrived. Just as he had described in the letter. The realization sent chills through Ethan. He was witnessing history. The exact event that started everything. Then Thomas noticed him. Ethan. The young man's voice trembled. Ethan froze. How do you know my name? Thomas looked equally confused. I don't. The answer made no sense. Yet before Ethan could respond, Thomas pointed behind him. Ethan Carter. Slowly, Ethan turned. A large memorial plaque stood mounted on the station wall. The same plaque from the visions. The same plaque from Thomas's letter. The one carrying Ethan's name. And for the first time, he could finally read the entire inscription. In memory of Ethan Carter. 1999 to 2026. Who chose the future over himself. And saved every generation that followed. Silence. Absolute silence. Ethan couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The plaque confirmed everything. Not only his death. But the reason for it. He had died saving the future. Saving history itself. The word struck him harder than anything before. Because suddenly the memorial didn't feel distant. Didn't feel theoretical. It felt real. Inevitable. A low vibration spread through the station. The floor trembled. Lights flickered. Passengers slowly turned their heads. Every one of them. At exactly the same moment. Toward the entrance. Ethan felt dread wash over him. He already knew what he would see. The doors slid open. And darkness entered. Not darkness as an absence of light. Darkness as a presence. A living thing. The Devourer. It had arrived. People throughout the station froze. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Digital clocks stopped. Announcements cut off mid-sentence. Even the air became still. The Devourer moved forward. Reality distorted around it. Glass cracked. Metal groaned. The station bent and twisted like a reflection in disturbed water. Young Thomas stared in horror. What is that? Ethan didn't answer. Because he didn't know how. How could anyone explain something older than history? Something that existed beyond time? The Devourer raised a hand. The entire station shook violently. Then every screen in the building displayed the same image. A doorway. The glowing doorway from Black Hollow. Only this one was enormous. Miles wide. Expanding. Opening. The final opening. The Devourer spoke. Its many voices merged into a single terrible sound. The anchor has arrived. Every light exploded simultaneously. Glass rained from the ceiling. The station plunged into darkness. Only the Devourer remained visible. A silhouette against impossible shadows. Then it pointed directly at Ethan. And for the first time, he understood the truth. The Devourer didn't want the doorway. The Devourer didn't want Thomas. The Devourer didn't want history. It wanted him. The anchor. The one choice it could never control. And somewhere beyond the shaking walls of the station, the clock struck midnight. The clock struck midnight. The sound echoed through Ashwood Central Station like a gunshot. One chime. Then another. Then another. 12 in total. With each strike, reality trembled. Glass shattered across the platforms. Steel beams groaned overhead. The station seemed caught between existence and collapse. And standing at the center of it all was the Devourer. Waiting. Watching. Smiling. If something that ancient could be said to smile. Ethan stood frozen. Young Thomas Carter stood beside him. Terrified. Confused. Completely unaware that the fate of history itself now hung in the balance. The Devourer's countless voices merged together. A horrifying chorus. At last. The station lights flickered. Darkness surged across the walls like living water. The creature extended a hand toward Ethan. The anchor. The word echoed from every direction. Not spoken. Felt. As if reality itself recognized the title. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He wanted to run. To hide. To wake up from what had become the worst nightmare imaginable. But there was nowhere left to run. And deep down he knew it. The Devourer took another step forward. The station floor cracked beneath its feet. Fragments of time flickered around it. For brief moments Ethan saw impossible images. Dinosaurs crossing city streets. Ancient castles standing beside skyscrapers. Future spacecraft hovering above medieval villages. Past and future colliding. History unraveling. Exactly as Thomas had feared. Exactly as the journal had warned. The barrier between times was breaking. And it was breaking fast. Suddenly a brilliant white light exploded behind them. Ethan turned. The doorway. The glowing tear in reality had opened once again. Larger than ever before. Its edges stretched across the entire station. A wound in time itself. Inside the light stood dozens of figures. Observers. Hundreds of them. Watching. Waiting. Their pale faces illuminated by the glow. The Devourer stopped. For the first time, uncertainty crossed its dark form. The observers had arrived. Not to help Ethan. Not to stop the Devourer. But to protect the timeline itself. One observer stepped forward. The same one who had spoken to Ethan in the library. Its unfinished face remained expressionless. Yet its voice carried urgency. "Ethan Carter." The Devourer growled. A sound like mountains breaking apart. The observer ignored it. "There is only one way." Ethan already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. "Tell me." The observer pointed toward the doorway. "The connection must be closed." Ethan looked at the glowing portal. Then back at the observer. "How?" Silence. The observer hesitated. And in that hesitation, Ethan understood. "No." The observer lowered its head. "The anchor must choose to remain." Young Thomas stared. "What does that mean?" Nobody answered. Because they all knew. The anchor. The connection. The bridge between timelines. If Ethan entered the doorway and closed it from within, he would never return. The realization hit him harder than anything before. His family. His parents. His friends. His entire future. Gone. Sacrificed. For people who would never know what he had done. For generations not yet born. For a future he would never see. The Devourer laughed. A terrible sound. "You see." It spread its arms. "History asks for everything." The creature stepped closer. "But I ask for nothing." Its voice became softer. Tempting. Persuasive. "Walk away." The station trembled. Let the doorway remain open. More cracks spread through reality. Ancient forests appeared briefly between modern walls. Future cities flickered overhead. Time continued collapsing. The Devourer smiled. "You live." The offer hung in the air. Simple. Easy. Walk away. Save himself. Let history die. Young Thomas suddenly grabbed Ethan's shoulder. "Ethan." His voice shook. "If you stay." He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. Ethan nodded slowly. For the first time since finding the letter, everything became clear. Thomas hadn't written the letters to predict the future. He had written them to prepare Ethan for this moment. This decision. This choice. Because the future had never been fixed. It had always depended on him. The Devourer took another step. Reality screamed around it. The station began falling apart. The doorway pulsed wildly. Observers moved into defensive positions. The final battle was seconds away. And still Ethan hadn't decided. Then he remembered something. His grandfather. William Carter. The stories by the fireplace. The lessons he taught him. One memory stood above all others. A simple sentence. A sentence Grandpa often repeated. The right choice is usually the hardest one. Ethan closed his eyes. For a moment, the fear vanished. The uncertainty vanished. Everything became still. When he opened his eyes again, he knew what he had to do. The observer saw it immediately. So did the Devourer. "No," the Devourer hissed. For the first time, genuine fear entered its voice. Ethan smiled sadly. Then he turned toward the doorway. And took his first step. Toward destiny. Toward sacrifice. toward the choice that would determine the fate of every generation to come. Behind him, the Devourer screamed. Ahead of him, the doorway blazed brighter than the sun. And somewhere beyond the light, something was waiting. Ethan stepped into the light. Immediately, the world disappeared. The station vanished. The Devourer vanished. The observers vanished. Even sound itself vanished. For a moment, there was nothing. No up. No down. No past. No future. Only endless white light stretching in every direction. Ethan felt weightless. As though he were floating between seconds. Between moments. Between entire centuries. Then the visions began. Thousands of them. Millions. History unfolded around him like pages in an infinite book. He saw ancient civilizations rise and fall. He saw kings crowned and forgotten. He saw ships crossing oceans. Cities being built. Wars being fought. Children being born. Lives beginning. Lives ending. Every human story. Every moment. Every choice. Connected. Intertwined. Beautiful. Fragile. And then Ethan finally understood. Time wasn't a road. It wasn't a line. It was a living thing. A tapestry woven from countless decisions. Every choice mattered. Every life mattered. Even the smallest action changed the pattern. And now one thread had begun to unravel. The Devourer wasn't trying to destroy history. It was trying to consume it. To absorb every possibility. Every future. Every past. Until only itself remained. A universe with no choices. No freedom. No change. Only endless stillness. That was why the observers opposed it. That was why Thomas had been shown the future. That was why Ethan had become the anchor. Not because he was special, but because he was willing to choose. A voice echoed through the white light. Soft. Familiar. Ethan. He turned. And saw his grandfather. William Carter. Standing only a few feet away. Ethan's breath caught. Grandpa. William smiled warmly. The same smile Ethan remembered from childhood. The same smile from every family photograph. I knew you'd make it here. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. I miss you. I know. William stepped closer. For a moment, Ethan forgot everything else. The Devourer. The doorway. The future. All of it. He simply stood with his grandfather once more. The way he always wished he could. I don't want to go, Ethan whispered. William nodded. Of course you don't. His expression became gentle. But sometimes courage means doing something even when you're afraid. The words sounded exactly like something his grandfather would say. Because they were. The white light shifted. New images appeared. Ethan saw his parents. Safe. Laughing. Growing old. He saw children playing in parks decades from now. He saw future generations of the Carter family. People who would exist only if history survived. Lives that depended upon his choice. William placed a hand on his shoulder. You already know what to do. Ethan nodded slowly. He did. The light parted. And beyond it stood the heart of the doorway. A brilliant sphere of energy. Larger than a building. Pulsing with impossible power. The source of the connection. The source of the fracture. The source of everything. And wrapped around it like a shadow was the Devourer. Its true form. Vast. Ancient. Terrifying. Far larger than Ethan had imagined. It wasn't merely a creature. It was a force. A hunger. A void that existed outside history itself. The Devourer's countless voices echoed together. You cannot stop me. The sphere trembled. Reality shook. The future flickered. Ethan stared into the darkness. Then smiled. The Devourer paused. Confused. Why do you smile? Ethan remembered Thomas. His grandfather. The letters. The journey. The sacrifices made across generations. Then he answered. Because you still don't understand. The darkness shifted uneasily. Understand what? Ethan took a step forward. Choice. The single word echoed through eternity. The same truth Thomas had discovered. The same truth the observers protected. The same truth the Devourer could never comprehend. Freedom. Sacrifice. Love. Hope. None of them could be controlled. Because they were choices. Human choices. And that made them stronger than fear. Stronger than fate. Stronger than the Devourer itself. The sphere of light responded. Its brightness intensified. The doorway began collapsing. The Devourer roared. The sound shook reality. No. Darkness lashed outward. Trying to stop him. Trying to break his resolve. Trying to rewrite history. But it was too late. Ethan placed both hands upon the sphere. Energy surged through him. Memories flooded his mind. Every letter. Every moment. Every choice. Every generation. Then the light exploded. Back at Ashwood Central Station, reality shattered. The Devourer screamed. The observers watched silently. Young Thomas shielded his eyes. The station disappeared. The doorway collapsed inward. The fracture closed. Past and future separated once more. History healed itself. The final opening ended. And the Devourer vanished. Gone. Forever. Silence followed. Then darkness. Then nothing at all. When Thomas opened his eyes, he found himself standing once again inside Black Hollow Forest. October 14, 1916. Only 3 minutes had passed. Exactly as he would later write. The doorway was gone. The forest was quiet. Normal. But Thomas remembered everything. The future. The station. The boy named Ethan Carter. The sacrifice. The choice. Tears filled his eyes. Because he finally understood why he had been shown those visions. He had been chosen to carry a message. A warning. A letter. For someone who wouldn't be born for another 100 years. 10 years later, on June 17, 1926, Thomas sat alone in the attic of the Carter house. Rain tapped softly against the roof. A blank sheet of paper rested before him. Slowly, he began writing. To whoever finds this in 2026. And so the cycle was completed. The beginning became the ending. The ending became the beginning. Exactly as it was always meant to be. Years later, in a future that now existed because of Ethan's choice, the Carter family house remained standing. The attic remained untouched. The cedar chest remained hidden. The letter remained waiting. But one thing had changed. A photograph now sat beside Thomas's portrait. A photograph nobody could explain. A photograph that appeared shortly after Thomas's death. The picture showed two people standing together. Thomas Carter. And Ethan. Smiling. Side by side. Across a century. Across time itself. Connected forever. Perhaps that was the true mystery. Not the doorway. Not the observers. Not even the devourer. But the fact that one person's choice could echo across generations. Changing lives they would never meet. Protecting futures they would never see. Leaving behind a story worth remembering. A final letter. A final sacrifice. And a reminder that the future is never written for us. It is written by us. One choice at a time. The end.